Let's get our PowerPoint going. There we go. So for today's agenda, like usual, I will do our mindfulness moment and introduce our presenters. And then we'll hear from Holly Bell on 504 and Ashely Pistello on SafeUT. So this morning's mindfulness moment, I was inspired by Valentine's today. So this one is 3 steps to cultivate kindness on Valentine's Day and beyond. And I'll post this so you guys can get to the link if you want it. So this article talks about the important element of mindfulness, or an important element of mindfulness is the practice of kindness. Children and teens respond to our positive regard. Choosing to build a stronger culture of kindness means you and your students undertake a 3-part process, which means lots of repeating. So the first step would be to articulate your intentions to be kind. The second step is recognizing others' actions of kindness. And the third step is reflecting mindfully on the rewarding feeling when others are kind to us. The author goes on to say this may be introduced as an activity of the week or the month, but may also be a rewarding loop cycle throughout the year. Let's see, next slide, there we go. So step 1, articulate our intention to be kind. Some of the suggestions are to make a bulletin board or a kindness wall with your door. Ask students to give examples of kindnesses they've received. Encourage them to share kindnesses that don't cost money, don't take heroic action, and don't require preparation, just readiness and follow through. And some of the examples they gave are to practice making eye contact with people, which I thought in this time of masks, that's an important one. I've been told multiple times people can see your smile even in your eyes. Another suggestion is asking how I can help you. Let's see, get the PowerPoint to work. There we go. Whatever ideas your students offer, receive them gratefully, and this will help them build confidence and creativity in being kind toward others. So step 2 is recognizing one another's kind actions. So when others are kind to us. The author talks about it, carving out a specific time for this activity might feel deliberate at first, but make it part of your morning or your afternoon, and soon it should hopefully become routine. And it also talks about us, providing a space for students to feel safe and share about their kindness activities. So the third idea is reflecting on rewards for kind actions. And one of the examples they gave is soaking in the good. So you ask your student to recall a kind action they've undertaken. Invite them to feel in their bodies where the memory might show up, in their stomach, in their throat, in their heart, or in the feeling of a smile. This is the soaking in and can be part of your daily mindfulness practice with them as a way to close a short practice. So I just liked that it was a way to do mindfulness with them just by simply asking questions. Okay, so now we will introduce Ms. Holly Bell, who is the Equity and Advocacy Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. She is a passionate advocate for educational equity and support for schools and districts in their efforts to serve underrepresented and marginalized students. She assists schools and districts in meeting the federal requirements outlined in Title IX, Section 504, and Title VI, which address discrimination and educational access for students based on sex, disability, race, color, or national origin. And Holly has become one of my friends, so I'm excited to hear from her today. All right, after Holly, we will hear from Ashely Pistello, who's actually fairly new to USBE. Well, new to me since I've been there forever. Anyway, Ashely is a project administrator for SafeUT, and she also works as a liaison with the state board. She was a high school math teacher for 4 years before joining the SafeUT marketing and outreach team in January of 2020. Her primary role is to oversee the SafeUT Super User Grant. Sounds fun. I'm interested to hear more. But also assists with K through 12 outreaches, which is what her presentation will be for us today. So with that, I will stop my share and I can see Holly's face. So I would dare say she's ready to take over.
Thank you, Amanda. And yes, Amanda is one of my dear friends. Our dogs are even friends.
Yep.
So thanks for inviting me. I think I probably have met some of you. And in doing a little research on the Check and Connect program, talking with Amanda, I first want to give my appreciation to you for your role in students' lives, for being one of the trusted individuals in their lives that helps to keep them on track, helps to keep their focus, and just be someone there for them to help them feel connected and a sense of belonging in the school. So thank you for that. And I'm going to present to you on 504. 504 is a little misunderstood. This law can be very misunderstood. So any opportunity I can to teach people about what Section 504 is and how they can advocate for the civil rights of students with disabilities, I'll take any chance I can get. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And please feel free to ask questions. Amanda, it would be great for you to help me with the chat feed since I'm sharing my screen.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I'm not the best at multitasking when it comes to the chat feed.
Well, it's hard with Zoom. I'm happy to run Copilot. I'll let you know.
Okay. All right, and so as we always do in virtual meetings, can everyone see my screen? Okay. So what is Section 504? Section 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It is a federal civil rights law. In 2009, the Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act became law and broadened the interpretation of Section 504. Students with disabilities qualify for the civil rights protections provided by Section 504. Section 504 and the ADA prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability in all school programs and activities in public schools receiving direct or indirect federal funding. And maybe you just heard my dog say hello. These laws are designed to provide equal access and fairness in general education to students with disabilities. This is the joy of working from home. Okay, through their 504 accommodation plan. So be aware that students who have a special education and individual education plan, individualized education plan, are also protected under Section 504. So this is a civil right that is allowed for all students with disabilities. So what do we consider a disability? The ADA's current definition of a disability means, with respect to a person, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. Can you hear my dog, Amanda? You know, I have to say, this is a side note. I've actually appreciated seeing people working from home and seeing their personal lives, their children coming in and out. You know, it just personalizes people to hear their dogs. And I think that has been kind of a fun little thing that we didn't realize before. So I got off track. Okay, so here's some examples of disabilities you'll often see under Section 504. The most common, well, I've cited the most common actually on this list. I will tell you that the most problematic, when I say problematic, is when I see the most resistance or the most confusion, it's with ADHD and ADD and mental health impairments. Since this is a discrimination law, I'm going to give you a little piece of information that I learned the other day. Because when we're talking about discrimination, and particular people with disabilities, we're talking about ableism is the terminology when we are talking about discrimination. And so with our students with mental health impairments, there is a discrimination terminology for that, and it's called saneism. So people in general who have these mental health, I've been struggling to find a positive word, because I don't like the word impairment, but if people have a mental health issue, then it's often stigmatized and misunderstood. I have, as an example, I've been working with a mom. I try to help in situations where, I get calls saying that their child is not being treated fairly, and her child has a panic disorder. And the administrator in the school is being very resistant about providing accommodations, and has this attitude of like, they just need to get over it. Well, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced a panic attack, or have known someone who has experienced a panic attack, but it can literally get to the point where they feel like they're going to die. So this child struggles to get to school. This is legitimately something that is substantially limiting this child's ability to access education. And it's hard to understand mental illness. It's hard to understand these things. Not all people, not all students. 504 is a lifespan protection, but we're talking about students. So not all students who have who are having these mental health issues qualify under Section 504, but this student does, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. So Child Find is an important law for you to understand. I'm trying to make this really applicable to mentors, and part of this is understanding what your obligations are working in the education system with this law, but also having an awareness for your students that this exists, that this is something that's available to them if necessary. And that's what Child Find is our obligation as all educators to find these students, to refer them, so identify them, locate, and evaluate them. So evaluate, like referring them for an evaluation for a 504. This is all responsibility. This is a legal requirement that's included in the IDEA and Section 504. So all children who have disabilities and who may be entitled to special education services. And the Child Find law is very broad as far as obligations. And I don't want you to take on this responsibility. This is more administrative, but we are supposed to be broadcasting this everywhere. So for homeless students, for students who are in foster homes, for students who are being homeschooled, it is our responsibility under this legal requirement of Child Find to help identify, locate, and evaluate those students, even private school students. Now, this is, so for you, if you come into contact with these students, and you might, as far as the students you're working with, it is your legal obligation to refer them if you feel like there might be a need there. So let's look at what some of the red flags might be that you could look for as far as referring a student. So perhaps when a student has been evaluated under IDEA, if they don't qualify, it's a consideration. It's not a guarantee. Sometimes people think, my student didn't qualify for an IEP, they can get a 504. That's not a guarantee. So when a parent is frequently expressing a concern, and we have those squeaky wheels and they can be annoying, but if they're shouting from the hilltops, my child needs help, at least refer the child so that they can be evaluated and we can determine this. So when a suspension or expulsion is being considered, so we'll see maybe a lot of behavior issues that are coming. You'll see this with students with ADHD, you'll see this with students with dyslexia, you'll see this with students who have mental health impairments. Their behavior has an underlying cause. So my background is in counseling. So a lot of the ways that I look at 504 is from that lens. And so understanding kind of what's underlying behavior, this can be a red flag for us that the student might have a disability they're really struggling in school. And that's why their behavior indicates this. So retention isn't so much applied with 504. That's just keeping them back a year. But when a student shows a pattern of inattention or not benefiting from classroom instruction, so you'll see that in their grades often when a student returns to school after a serious illness or injury. This is a problem that sometimes comes up and this might be something you're aware of. When a student returns from the hospital, whether it be, rehabilitation for any kind of drug abuse or mental health or just the things that are real physical and a concussion, sometimes they just go straight to the nurse. And nobody else in the school is aware of the fact that the student was out. Or I found that as a counselor, I was like, you were out to the hospital? When did this happen? And so if you are aware, this is something you could say, hey, have you considered a 504 for this student, that just came back? Because don't assume that they know. Don't assume that people know. Communication is not the best thing that humans do. So you can help out with that. And then the chronic health condition that is often goes along with that. So ADHD, we talked about. Substance abuse, I just mentioned. If you have a child that says to you, yeah, I used to have a 504. I talked to a parent yesterday, actually it's the same parent that has a child with panic disorder. And the school keeps telling her, well, we need to do an in-class observation because, to see if they qualify. And then she told me that her child had a 504. And I said, was that 504 ever taken away? No. And if you noticed, the record of impairment is a qualification under the law. So even if the 504 had been taken away, the child still qualifies as having a disability because a record of an impairment. So if they had an IEP, they had a 504, the 504 follows them until someone says, your child doesn't need accommodations. They still qualify, but they don't need accommodations. So I said, this whole qualification thing, this is irrelevant. Your child has a 504 plan. It just needs to be updated. So if a child tells you, I had an IEP, I had a 504, I don't have it anymore, that might be something you need to follow up on or tell them to follow up on. Really, these kids, they need an advocate because you'll tell them, you need to follow up on this. The next thing you know, they're like, you can talk to them the next day. I can talk to my son the next hour. He's 14. He's like, I don't know what he said. So I don't know what contact you have with their caregivers or that kind of thing. So if they're taking medication, if they say they're seeing a physician or outside counselor, or if you're seeing these signs, these anxiety and depression withdrawal, there's a change in behavior. So who is eligible? So a student is eligible for accommodation plan if the evaluation shows that the student has a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Now, can that be any more subjective? Probably not. This law, I'll just say it's kind of gray. And I hate to say when I get a question about qualification, that kind of thing, that it depends. I hate giving that answer, but what it depends on is substantial limitation. And the great thing about this, it's kind of great and then not so great sometimes. It's decided by a team. So you don't just have one person making this decision. And it's looking at the individual needs of the child. So here's some of the major life activities that can be impacted. That's a lot, right? And this isn't even an exhaustive list. Life takes a lot of activities. There are a lot of activities in life. All these things can impact a student's access to education. I mean, really look at this list. If you're starving, how can you pay attention in class? If you're not sleeping at night, how can you pay attention? Sleeping is interesting. You'll sometimes have some students who have severe anxiety who are doing really well in school. And so that's why this one right under sleeping, learning, almost always we're focusing on learning. We're focusing on grades. And you'll hear educators say, they're doing fine in class. Their grades are great, straight A's. There's not a disability, there's not a parent, they don't need a 504. But then you'll have the parent shouting, but she's not sleeping. You know, she's doing 8 hours of homework after school. This is impacting this child's life, this quality of life. How long can they keep that up and have a quality of life that we all want and we all have a right to? And so we need to listen to that. And that is part of the qualification under Section 504. So I mentioned a little bit about the evaluation process. I'll just, you may or may not be involved in that. I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in a 504. And you may not have thought about the fact you might be a good member of the team. It all depends on how well you know the child. Because, you know, we talked about this referral, and you can be one of those individuals who refers the child because you're seeing these things. You've got a good eye on it. From what I've heard, you know, learned about mentors, from I've learned, read about the Check and Connect program, you've got a good eye on these kids. You're really keeping an eye out. So then you have to get written consent to evaluate from the parent or guardian. So that's a must. There aren't a lot of musts under 504, I'm going to say. It's all based on case law, Office for Civil Rights findings, hearing officer resolutions. That's basically where we get the interpretation of the law. One of the things that's solid is you need that written consent. And then you have to provide the parent or guardian with their rights. This is right to review their records, how they can appeal, how they can they can request a due process hearing, they can file with OCR. All of these things are part of their rights. So you have to provide that to them. And then there's a team. So that's what I was saying, a team of individuals who are knowledgeable of the child. And hopefully, and I always try to say parents and guardians, so I need to fix this slide. So including them is highly recommended, but it's not legally required. The parents and guardians don't always they don't ever like to hear that when they say, well, sorry, you can be excluded. But where the next part, when it says they have to review all available evidence, this is where, when we look at the court cases, if you didn't involve the parent, typically that's not something they'll come down on you with. But if you didn't take into account what the parent or guardian gave you, the evidence they gave you, then it will be a problem. So, but here's where I'm saying you might be one of those people that is the most knowledgeable of the child. So you might be a good candidate to be on that team. And this is something that's not always understood, because they're like, well, we'll put all the teachers on the team. We'll put, you know, all these people on the team who've never met this child, who don't have really any observation of anything that could really help to inform the process of eligibility or accommodations that would be most appropriate for this child. It can be grandma, it can be doctor, it can be it can be a teacher from kindergarten and this child's in high school. I mean, it can be any person who is knowledgeable of the child. And so then they determine if they're eligible, and they can discuss accommodations and put together a plan. So what that plan, the Section 504 accommodation plan, differs from an IEP, because an IEP, the real key component is that it includes specialized instruction, and it requires documentation of measurable growth. So they have to have goals and things like that. Whereas the 504 plan should be provided with just personalized accommodations based on equal access to general education. So modifications, when you're getting into modifications of assignments and things like that, then the child might be a better candidate for an IEP. So here's some examples, looking at, probably heard many of these things as far as extended times on tested assignments. That's the favorite. That's like, everybody thinks, let's just give them extended time. That's not always effective. And the research I've done, especially on ADHD, extended time on tests, or if we're looking at dyslexia, you can give them all the time in the world, but if they don't have the reading comprehension, or they cannot even read the text, or they cannot even focus for that long, it doesn't matter how much extended time you give them. So we don't want to just throw accommodations willy-nilly and do a carbon copy of the last person's 504. This is really about an individualized plan. So here are some examples. And you can see some of this is occupational physical therapy. Some of this involves the nurse, involves the psychologist, involves different people in the building or outside of the building. With 504, you can refer them to counseling outside of the building and those types of things. You just have to make sure that you pay for it, because this is a discrimination law. We can't discriminate on a student with disabilities based on their resources. And this is something that I'm on this slide I'm covering, is that one of the things, if you ever hear the child say, oh, well, so-and-so told me that as long as I get a doctor's note, I can get a 504 plan. That's illegal, because you can't require a child to get documentation. First of all, a diagnosis is not required. You do not have to have someone say this child has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, has been diagnosed with major depression, has been diagnosed with ADHD. Even a child who has those impairments might not be substantially limited to the point that they need a 504. So when they say you need this note, and a child doesn't have health insurance or a way to get to this person or that sort of thing, and let's face it, people have the doctor friend down the street. So this child might have parents that are like, oh, I'll just go to Joe. I've Dr. Joe, who has been our physician for generations. They'll just write a note and then just bring it to the school and say, here, my child needs a 504. You have to do it because I brought this note. So you can't require it as a school, and the parent or guardian can't just say, give it to me because I have this documentation. You have to look at multiple sources of evidence.
Miss Holly.
Yeah.
Got a couple comments in the chat. Now it's time.
Yeah, please jump in anytime.
So the first one is a question. What do you do with teachers that won't adhere to the 504 plans?
That never happens.
I'm sorry. This is probably inappropriate that I laugh, but it's because I am a 504 child and a parent of a 504 kid. So I laugh out of keeping it going from frustration.
I hear this all the time. And because I get all the calls. So now with that said, when I'm a neutral party at the USB, so it's not always easy for me to kind of remain neutral, but I know that's my role. And one thing I've learned in the past 3 years is that when things are reported to me, I need to pause and hear the other side. As a counselor, I'm like that. My heart is just hurting for your child who can't, is having these panic attacks, who's just struggling and suffering, but I have to talk to the school. And so they might say the accommodations are not being followed. And then that's not always the case. It's usually something in the middle. There's usually a misunderstanding. Either we have to guarantee that this person has received the accommodation plan. One of the things that might happen, and this is something you can help with, is that there can be semester change, and people don't think, oh, I need to transfer the 504 plan over to the new teachers, or there's that 10 days where students can change classes, and so the 504 has been disseminated to everybody at the beginning of the year, but then the student comes in and change teachers, and that 504 might not change hands. So there might be this thinking that they're not abiding by the accommodations because they're not abiding by them, just assuming they have the plan. So let's first just make sure they have the plan, because that's not always the case. And I recognize that it's difficult for teachers or whoever it is that's providing the accommodations. It's difficult for them to manage the class and provide the accommodations. And so I understand that. And there are some teachers, and I don't like to pick on teachers because they're not always the ones providing the accommodations, but sometimes they might assume that the child doesn't need that in their class. Like they don't understand the legality behind following the plan. And so they make assumptions like, I don't need to do this one because this child doesn't need it, which is not the most important it's not the process that they should go through. The process they should go through, because they might have really valid reasons, because we don't want to over accommodate the child. In fact, there are court cases where schools districts were cited for over accommodating. And so there's like this fine little line. So they don't want to over accommodate, but they need to refer that information to the 504 team and say, we might want to reevaluate this. This is not an appropriate accommodation. So sometimes they might not be following it because of those reasons. And sometimes they're overwhelmed, they're negligent, and that you just need to bring that to the attention of someone. So this can be a hard conversation, right? Especially for you when you're saying, I'm observing these things. I don't want to sit down with the teacher and say, hey, you're not following the plan. From what I hear, you're not following the plan. So this is where the advocacy piece happens, where you can talk to the child. And I'm not a big proponent of putting the responsibility in the lap of the child, but your role and our role is to help them, empower them, right? To help them advocate for themselves. They've got to learn to do that. And in fact, if they have a disability and they're transitioning into post-secondary, there's not the same requirements as far as that child find piece is not applied in post-secondary. So they have to learn to advocate for themselves. There's usually a disability center or something like that. So we're teaching them to advocate. So you can say, okay, so you're telling me that you're not getting these accommodations. Have you talked to your teacher? Have you talked to your parent? Have you told them this is what's happening, or your guardian, so that they can follow up on it? If that's not happening, then you can go to the 504 coordinator if they have one in the school, or whoever. There's probably someone in the school who is the point person for these plans, and say, this has come to my awareness. Maybe you sit in classes. I'm not sure if mentors sit in classes, but maybe you're not seeing it. You're actually literally not seeing it in the classes. You can go to this person and say, I'm not observing these things happening, or the child's telling me this. So there's some options, and maybe you have a really good relationship with the teacher, and just sit down with them and say, so I'm aware that the student has this disability. And these are the things that they have told me supports them, and this is what's on their plan. And so, and they don't feel like they're getting this accommodation. What can we do to make sure that they're getting this accommodation, and having that empathy piece, and just saying, I know you're so overwhelmed. I don't know. There's several different options depending on your relationships with people in the school. That's a lot of words.
So Holly, there's a couple more. So the other is they're looking for a suggestion on a specific situation. So there's a student with a 504 plan that has an accommodation that goes against school policy. However, they're providing the accommodation anyway, but now that student has become a target from other students because they're an exception to the rule.
Okay, so the school has written an accommodation into the plan that goes against school policy.
That's the way it reads. So I wonder if it's, gosh, I don't even, oh, it's an Ignacio. There we go.
Okay, so a student came to us from a different school district. And so we have a no electronic policy, no phones or anything during class time. So their 504 states that they could have AirPods in and listen to music because of their anxiety. So we explained that our policy to the parents, but said, hey, we'll let them know, we're just letting you know this is the school policy. So the student has them in. And so now it's kind of in a awkward situation because they're a target from other students.
Right.
Students want to know why they're the exception. Teachers can't necessarily talk about it. So
Yeah. And I
so
don't think this is
yeah.
uncommon either. Yeah. Because sometimes policies do need to be, there needs to be exceptions to policies for students with disabilities. And, you know, and you can, okay, several different things with that. So, yeah, I mean, and this comes up with students with diabetes who have to have snacks when there's no snacks, you know, allowed in the classroom, or a lot of different things where there needs to be exceptions to policies. And then you have this child is put in a position where they're already different, and then they're being set apart even more at this point. So we're weighing that, right? And part of looking at accommodations is thinking broadly and thinking, what are all of our options? What is going to be the best in all circumstances? But you have this child, and honestly, I think all of you know, well, or could understand, my job gives me a lot of anxiety. So I listen to Chopin all day. It calms me down. And if I were at work, I wouldn't want to bother people. So I put on earbuds, and it helps calm me down so I can be more effective. So we know that this is probably an accommodation that can help. And this might be the most effective accommodation for the student. It might be temporary, but there might be other ways too. But the team needs to decide that. The team needs to sit down with the parent, guardian, student and say, okay, so what are the issues here? We've got, this is really helping you, which we want to make sure that whatever we're doing is helping you to, you know, concentrate in class and get access to your education. And then we have these social issues, right? We don't want you to be stigmatized, and you're telling me that you are. So what can we do? So maybe the team needs to sit down and try to decide, okay, so is this the best accommodation for you based on what we're seeing? But sometimes those kinds of policies there needs to be exceptions. But you're having to weigh all those options. So I can't give you, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to say it depends. I'm sorry. But it does. It depends on this individual child. That might be the best option for them, but there also might be something else, giving them sort of a tactile, giving them something tactile that, you know, maybe it's not audio, something tactile, something, maybe there's some other option that would not be visible to other students. I have a lot of people contact me to help them think outside of the box. Before the whole virtual thing was happening, that was something that was sort of like an aha for a lot of people. I said, well, if you have this student who's not able to come to school, you can give them an electronic option. So now that's just the norm. Now it's just, but trying to think outside of the box. But you're going to have to meet together to a team to look at that. Because it sounds like it's a problem for everyone that you're trying to resolve, but you do have to follow the plan as is until you can revisit it. So is that helpful? I'm happy to help with individual scenarios, because that's where often people are experiencing similar things. You can tell me if it's not helpful. Honestly.
No, it's helpful. I'm just, we are going to review, and we've talked about trying to come up with other things. But I think the hard thing is that at least for now, while this is going on, that student, and the teachers have been great and said, okay, you know, but it's hard because that we see, and obviously that it puts that student in a really bad situation. And then we're kind of stuck too, because like you can't explain it to anybody. You can't say anything about it.
I know, confidentiality.
Yeah. So it just irritates the other students more. And then it's like then that person becomes even a bigger target, you know? So
does the student, I mean, it should be optional for the student. They don't have to listen to it.
Well, and Holly, can I throw in? So this, if my suggestion would be like the non-visible ones, like Holly was talking about, maybe like a worry stone in their pocket, which is just a smooth piece of a rock or whatever that they can rub their hand on. Putty probably is a little more obvious than putting in your pocket, but those tactile ideas like Holly was talking about, I know that has helped anxiety with folks I've been involved with. And I was actually just looking for my putty yesterday and needing to replace it. But like Holly said, I would think you just probably need to meet together and ask the parents as well if they have some other options that would help the kiddo not be a target with the rest of them. But in the interest of time, Ms. Holly, I do have a couple more here. So we have 2 junior high students who are homeless. They qualify for an IEP. However, they have no foundation in math or English due to moving around. They struggle, and the mentor's thinking they probably would benefit from special ed math. Is there any accommodation in 504 for that?
Well, so a student who has an IEP is already covered on a 504. And
they didn't qualify for the IEP.
Oh, they did not qualify for the IEP.
Not qualify.
Okay, so yes. Now, you said this is a student
So
learning English, right?
2 junior high kids that are homeless.
Okay. So it's not necessarily a language issue.
I would think it's more to do with the moving around, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to see a drop in proficiency if they're not getting access to all of the general ed curriculum. So are they asking for specific accommodations? Was that what I heard? Are there accommodations under 504? You know, for these students, let's think about, as far as if we're talking about eligibility, it's highly likely they're eligible, because let's look at the substantial limitation of their major life activities, how this is impacting their health and well-being. It's highly likely that they would qualify under Section 504. When we think of disabilities, we're not, we often think of these physical disabilities rather than all of these other impairments, like I showed you on the one slide. And so these students are not accessing the general education. So there is an impairment in their life. And so they have to find a way, however they can, the school needs to find a way to provide that access, whether it's through electronic means that can follow them wherever they go, whether it's a tutor, whether it's, they just have to look at their various options, but whatever they can do to help them catch up, at least, to the best of their ability and whatever they can find that's reasonable. So the team would need to determine, this is where they got to think outside the box. This is a homeless student. They need to be able to get access to education wherever they are. And part of it too, I would think with these students is making sure that where they go next, these people are aware that they have a plan. They're aware of what the plan is. That's one of, with our migrant students, we're not always communicating well to where they go, that these students have these plans. And people aren't always straightforward about it either. There's a stigma attached with 504 and special education where, sometimes we'll see students transfer in and they won't say that they had a plan. They won't say, because they don't want that stigma. But if we can communicate that forward, make sure that people are aware of these students and their needs, And so I can't give, specifics too much on as far as how to accommodate these specific students, but we need to be able to use whatever means we have. And it's not federally funded. And so we'll get some resistance from schools when they say we have to pay for a private tutor. Well, if that's what the team decides is needed in order to have this student access their education and help them to meet proficiency levels, as other students have that option, they have the right for a free, appropriate public education. And that's what we have to do. So whatever it is under the circumstances of the students, they have a right to access that education. So we have to do whatever we have to do.
So I just jump in, sorry. So with special ed funding, we can't give them, like put them in a special ed math class? That's not allowed at all?
Oh man, you just asked like one of the most controversial questions. So, oh, okay. So technically they can be put into a special education class if that's what's appropriate for them. Where it gets tricky is that they can't get that specialized instruction that I mentioned was the distinctive factor. And then we're going to get into like, there's all these special education rules, but they can get in violation of using the funding, but there's also something called incidental benefit where you might have someone in a class, or you're in a class where that child may not have an IEP, but they're receiving benefit just by being in that environment, but they can't be treated differently with giving them specialized instruction. So it's tricky, it's legal, doesn't always happen, but it's hard for schools to manage that because they're like, okay, we have this funding. How can we not, have it apply to this child? So it is legal, doesn't happen often. There is always resistance with it, but it might be the most appropriate placement, but you have to make sure that you're not giving, that accommodation is not being directly tied to that funding through specialized instruction. It's tricky. So I think a lot of schools will go more towards the tutoring and things like that, or if they have classes available that are specifically designated for, students who are trying to reach proficiency. But yes, it is legal.
Okay. Our next question is, how about a student who refuses to participate in a gym class due to fitness level?
So again, we just have to evaluate this child. Is their fitness level due to some sort of an impairment? Do they have a medical condition? Obesity would qualify under Section 504 under some circumstances because it can limit one or more major life activities. So they just don't want to dress, or they're just lazy, then, but we just have to evaluate them and see, are there underlying factors? Is there some kind of depression? Is there some kind of other physical impairment? You just have to do an evaluation. And if the determination is you're just a teenager, like, get over it. Yeah. then that's that. But you just have to do an evaluation and look at all the available evidence. And I'm sure there's more there's probably more evidence than they just don't want to do it.
Okay, so our next comment, let's see, a teacher who wouldn't allow a student to use their 504 plan. Let's see, and use the special ed teacher to write the 504. Let's see. Okay, I had a teacher who wouldn't allow my student to use her 504 plan, and I used the special ed teacher who helped me write it and talk to the teacher. Okay, so the special ed teacher got involved in the 504 plan. And the mentor said it helped a lot and with the law and learning to follow the 504 plan. So I think the comment is really just don't forget you can talk to your special ed people when you're doing
Oh, yeah.
a 504 plan. And then you're getting, let's see.
And let me say something about that.
Yes.
When OCR is looking into cases, Office for Civil Rights, they will often use IDEA as kind of a gold standard when they're looking at the way that 504 is established. So, for instance, when we're looking at a timely evaluation, there's no time limit, but they'll often look to what are the special education standards. So in Utah, it's, you have 45 school days to complete an evaluation. So there's not a determination, but often when we're looking at cases, they are using special education. So if your special education leaders can, your team leaders can help, like, especially if they know the child, they are a really good resource. So yeah, don't forget that they're there, because IDA is kind of the gold standard when we're evaluating 504 processes.
I think that was the last of the questions. A couple comments about these conversations being helpful. So we've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
And we're still waiting on Ashely, so it might be a little longer than 10 minutes, but I just wanted to give you a time warning.
Thank you. And I wanted to follow up with something with Ignacio's situation. Just know that a student doesn't have to use the accommodations. So you don't have to say, well, you have to use this accommodation. It's that you're giving that as an option, and you're recording it and saying, if the child is feeling well and they don't need to listen to music, like, you're giving them the option. You're saying, if you want extended time, great. I have a lot of people saying, I had a 504, but I never use it, but it was available, right? You recognize that this might be an accommodation they need. So you're not violating the law if they're not using the accommodation. And I don't know if that is applicable to that particular, that situation, but just be aware that if a child's not using the accommodation on their plan, that's not, the teacher is not in violation, or the educator is not in violation. Okay, well, I only have a couple more slides. And this is specific to Check and Connect. I wanted to make this as applicable to you as possible. So I really love the Check and Connect program. So it improves the persistence, enrollment, access. So attendance and enrollment is key, right, to success for students. You can help with the involvement in the transition planning and attendance and their emotional behavioral disabilities. And so considerations for you: make sure you're following your child find obligations. You might be asked to provide some of the accommodations because you are in the education system, and there are some accommodations that you might be included in that plan. You might not always have a copy of the plan because, like Ignacio was saying, there's this confidentiality piece, and only the people who do have, a responsibility to the child under what their accommodation plan is will have access to that. But you might be aware that it exists, and most likely the students, parents, guardians will probably tell you. If there's a problem, they will tell you there's this accommodation that's not being followed. And so you don't even need a copy of the plan often. So you can help advocate by keeping that open line of communication. Like I was saying, communication is not our finest quality as far as humans go. So you can help be that catalyst of communication. And then participating when appropriate, which means, are you knowledgeable of the child? If you just met this child, shouldn't be on the team. And then holding a high expectation. So this is something that is really key to any of the students that I'm talking about, that I'm trying to protect their rights and their access. We see this a lot with students of color, students with disabilities, that they're not being held to the same expectations. They know you're doing this, not you necessarily. They know when this is being done to them, and they don't appreciate it. because their disability doesn't mean that they can't meet the expectations. You know, they might have like a math issue, but they're brilliant in a lot of other areas. And so if we're not holding them to the same expectations, it's not fair. We're not giving them the same access to education, and that's discrimination. And they know that you're doing it, and it tears down their self-esteem and will not help them to be productive, successful citizens. And so we're not setting them up for success if we're not holding them to high expectations. But so what 504 is kind of holding those expectations, but helping them to meet here. It's not about giving them advantages. When we're looking at discrimination, it's not about providing advantages. It's just helping them to close that gap that is, they don't have control over this discrepancy. They don't have control over that. So we're just helping them to meet where everyone else is, or well, not where they are, but where the expectations we have for everyone. And so this was a, all students can learn, they all have strengths, abilities. I've asked lots of questions, but this is, with whatever time we have left,
Well, we do have a few minutes at least, and I'm still waiting for Ashely to join us. So you guys are welcome to unmute or pop your questions in the chat, whatever works.
Holly, sorry, I keep hammering this, the special education funding. Why is it so restrictive and strict, and why is that?
they're different departments. IDEA, and I mean, they're all through the U.S. Department of Education. Why there is no funding for any civil rights law, not sure, because they're making it a federal obligation with no resources. So it all comes out of the general fund. So anytime you're talking about money, there's restrictions, and they are specific to whoever qualifies. So, and even though students with disabilities that have an IEP are covered under 504, if you don't have that mark, you know, that stamp of you qualify under special education, they're very restricted on the way that they're funded. And so I have no answers to why the Fed makes the decisions that they do. But it just, when it comes down to money, that's just why they're so strict. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to kind of the conversations with the board. If you're misusing the funds, then there's big penalties. So we have advocated, there is no state in the union that has, that the states have like provided their own funding and dedicated it to Section 504. It's something that we've tried to do in Utah. It fell by the wayside. I don't anticipate it will come back on the table soon, but there is no state in the union that has dedicated 504 funding. It's unfortunate. And what some schools will do, and I can't believe they tell me this out loud, is they're like, well, we just push them to qualify under IDEA so that they get the services. I'm like, why did you say that out loud? Like, that's so illegal, but that's what's happening, is so that they can pay for these expensive accommodations. If you have a full-time nurse dedicated to you, occupational therapist, anything of that regard, they're really expensive, and they're trying to push them into qualifying for special education, which if they do, that's great, but it's really a misuse and illegal to just kind of qualify them when they don't really qualify. So
it just seems like it would be pretty easy just to stick a student in a math class with a special ed math class just for that one period, especially if we're talking about junior high. and high school and stuff. It just seems like it would be so easy. You're just
I
gonna go to
know.
class.
Well, and this is something that I don't, you'll get a lot of pushback from special education because there's so many laws. And especially if we're looking at just the difficulty of not over accommodating that child with specialized instruction in the special education class. So I've heard a lot of pushback when that's something they want to do. And it's understandable because of the misuse of funds and wanting to make sure that that's, that you minimize that you try to prevent that. But it is legal for them to do that. So I know what you're saying. It's like, that would be probably an easy way to go, but not so easy in practice as far as the way that they monitor the funding.
Okay, Holly, we've got, let's see, Heather has her hand raised. Heather, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Oh, why home and hospital isn't happening.
All right, I'm not sure if Heather's having a hard time unmuting. We also have a comment. What's the resource if a teacher doesn't follow a 504? Would the mentors follow up with the principal? Does that make the most sense?
I would think so. Like I was saying, unless you have a really, really close relationship with the teacher, but I wouldn't put yourself in that situation. I think it's definitely something to bring to the attention of either the 504 coordinator. I mean, depending on the situation, maybe it's the counselor, maybe it's, but that's tricky for a teacher to be said, to be told like this isn't happening. But at the same time, if you have a good relationship, you can say, here's what I'm hearing. So I mean, you're kind of well, I don't know your role necessarily as far as if you're a neutral party, but it's that's hard to answer that question because I mean, oftentimes, yeah, is maybe involving the administrator is the best, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just have to determine what's your relationship with everyone involved in the situation. It's just that balancing act. I'm sure that you're faced with this all the time with how you're advocating for the child. What's the best way to do that to provide the best, safest circumstances for the child? It's no different with 504, although there are legal obligations for them to follow that plan. So it's even more important for you to follow through since there is that legal obligation. But it's like any other advocacy work that you're doing for them and you're making that judgment call. But it is important that you follow through, especially when you're hearing that it's not being adhered to.
Okay. Thank you. One more comment, and it was Heather. She can't unmute. Technology is.
I can unmute now.
Yay!
Hey, Holly, my question was if you know anything about why home hospital isn't happening. Sometimes students have kind of a temporary disability. They've had a surgery, they've had something that they, coming to school is difficult for them, and we don't need to go through all of the steps of a 504, but more of a temporary fix, so to speak. And it used to be that we could do home hospital for those students and have them gain access to curriculum that way. And even though we now have more electronic options, sometimes kids still need, that person to come to their home. Do you know why that's not happening? And it doesn't seem that it was just a COVID issue. It started to kind of trail off prior to COVID.
Well, with temporary disability, sometimes there's a qualification, but oftentimes, like you're saying, it's not applicable because they're just maybe home and hospital would be the most appropriate. So I don't know why it's trailing off. Like with COVID, it makes sense because you have to go by the health guidelines. So I mean, And I don't know that that can be a blanket statement, because it's probably dependent on the district or charter school if that's trailing off. So it might be just more applicable to your area. But if it's not happening, it's the most appropriate thing for the child, then that's something that needs to be addressed. But it's probably not something that I can give a broad general response to. But with COVID, it makes sense. Like, I don't want to, jeopardize the health of my employee. We've got to find another way because of the health guidelines and things, but.
Right. And it's just kind of interesting because, my mom has home hospital coming in from surgery, and a nurse comes in every day and helps her. And so home hospital's happening, but
Yeah.
somehow we excluded that from students. And like I said, sorry, that's a principal calling me. But anyway, yeah, it doesn't seem to just have been a isolated COVID thing. So I was just curious if you knew what was going on with that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that generally. I've heard plenty of violations of home and hospital and the way that it's executed, but not that it totally being taken off the table. Sometimes that's the most appropriate.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more comments. I hope I didn't miss any. I'm going to put your contact in the chat here.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Miss Holly.
I think I'm late to a meeting, but I'd rather hang out with y'all. I'm late to a meeting. I guess I better go.
All right, well, thank you. All right, and it will be Ashely's turn now. Hang on one.
It's great to talk to you all, and just contact me if you have any more questions. Thank you for everything you're doing. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Oh, thank you, Miss Holly. And there was my human moment. The dogs have found their voice this morning. But
my backyard is probably destroyed at this point. I see dirt all over the deck, and the tarp is all a mess. And yeah, and lots of fun. Good times here at Holly Bell's house. All right. Take care.
Thank you, Holly. Good luck. All right, Miss Ashely, I can see you on the list. Are you ready to get going?
I am, yes. Good morning. How are you all doing today?
We're being very human today. Holly's dog made a verbal appearance, mine are joining in. But that's what I like about this group. I feel like we get to hear information, but have a conversation at the same time.
Absolutely. So then I won't feel too awful if my dog decides to join in as well. So.
All right. And
yes, if it's okay, can I share my screen?
Absolutely. I was gonna say, you can take it away and I'll watch the chat, and I'm just here if you need anything.
Wonderful. Amanda, can you go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
I can see the whole view. So I've got the title on the left. I didn't know if you had started your presentation or not yet.
No, not yet. All right, here we go.
There we go.
Yep. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Ashely Pistello with SafeUT. So today is just a brief overview of SafeUT. It is a crisis chat and school safety tip line app that is available in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store to download at no cost to any of the users. So our agenda for today, a quick introduction. I'll give you a background of what I do, who I am, and how I work with SafeUT. We'll talk about what is SafeUT, features of the app, and a few different success stories of each feature. We'll discuss the SafeUT workflow and how it starts with a student or an individual and goes through our crisis counselors and maybe some additional steps or additional people if we feel the need to reach out to others. And then same as Holly, we can have some time for questions at the end. So yes, again, my name is Ashely Pistello. I am a project administrator for SafeUT, but my role is also a little bit different. I have been with SafeUT for about a year now, and that is my home agency. But I am also a dual employee with the Utah State Board of Education. So I do work with Holly as well. But in pre-COVID times, I would spend Mondays and Wednesdays over at the Board of Education, and then Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays over at the university with SafeUT. So my position was created to create and oversee a SafeUT super user program. So Christy Walker, the Safe and Healthy Schools team coordinator over at the Board of Ed, she and I sat down last summer and created this SafeUT super user grant program. And through that entire process, I do oversee 30 super users represented within 16 LEAs across the state, just implementing some more specific SafeUT mental health awareness projects, I guess, within their schools. So that is my primary role, but you know, side projects and whatnot. I am the K through 12 point of contact. So any questions about password resets or additional materials being needed to be sent out, or possible outreach in a K through 12 school, that is my role as well. And just for you guys, if you need my personal email or my work cell, that information is there for you. And I can always drop it in the chat as well if you're interested in it. So SafeUT. If you don't know, SafeUT is a crisis chat and tip line. So what it does is that it provides real-time crisis intervention through a live chat. So students or educators or parents can basically text in to a master's level clinician, and they can have a live conversation texting back and forth 24/7, 365. The second part of SafeUT is that it is a confidential tip program. So if students are worried about another student and their mental health, or if they saw a post on Instagram or Snapchat about a potential school threat, they can also submit a tip to our clinicians. Again, the clinicians will do kind of like their crisis assessment and send that tip over to the school, or possibly include other help as needed. And all of this can be done, like I said, from the smartphone. So you can download it to Android or Apple at no cost. As we expanded and started getting into elementary schools and things as such, we realized, you know, not everybody has access to a smartphone. So we have built these features, the text feature and the tip feature, onto our website as well. So as long as an individual has access to a desktop, whether that's at school or work or at home, they can also utilize SafeUT as well. So like I said, master's level clinicians, they answer these SafeUT chats, they answer the phone calls, they answer the tips 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all days of the year. So someone is always on the other line. They can help with anxiety, depression, bullying, relationship challenges, suicide-related challenges as well. Or for parents, if parents want to text in about asking for resources and they're unsure how to start a discussion with their students or with their kids about this specific thing, our counselors and clinicians can help find some resources for you as well. I was going to add something. Oh, yes. So from the time a individual texts in, they do get an automated message at first, but our clinicians are averaging their response time between 30 to 45 seconds. So within 30 to 45 seconds, you could be live texting a master's level clinician. Questions so far?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button there. Not questions yet, but folks would love some SafeUT cards and swag. I think this might be one of the populations that maybe has never gotten any. So
yes, absolutely. So at the end, or like I said, I can also drop my email in the chat as well. But if you can go ahead and just email me and kind of tell me what you're interested in. We do have business cards, both in English and Spanish. We do have posters in both English and Spanish. We do have magnets in English. Those are really only the collateral materials that we distribute to schools. But if you're interested in any of that, you can go ahead and send me an email. What you're interested in and how many-ish you would be needing, I can go ahead and send that out to you. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so once you download SafeUT, this is what the home screen will look like. When you first download it, it will ask you to create a PIN and whatnot, and it'll ask, you know, your population basically. So are you a K through 12 student? Are you a higher education student? Or are you a parent, guardian, or educator? And if K through 12 or higher ed student is pressed, it will ask you to choose which school that you are enrolled in. Because how SafeUT works is that it is legislatively funded. So the money goes through the boards of education to SafeUT, and schools need to be enrolled in SafeUT, and they get enrolled through myself and my team members. So once a school is enrolled, then any of their students, any of their parents, any of their teachers, educators, staff, their kind of working community has access to SafeUT at no cost. That is how SafeUT is available to individuals throughout the state. So we are in 100% of public K through 12 schools. I'm sorry, 100% of public high schools and 100% of middle schools. And we're about 85% into elementary schools, and we're getting requests for enrollment weekly. So those numbers are just growing. So once you identify kind of who you are, that's the only identifying information we have with the user is what school that they are connected to. This is what the home screen will look like. So you can start a chat, you can start a call, you can submit a tip, and then that bottom right-hand corner is to view any existing chats that you may have or tips that you might have submitted to our clinicians. But you cannot view that existing history unless you provide the PIN number that you provided and you created when you first downloaded the app. So it is protected. And like I said, if you don't have a device, that website down there in red, safeut.med.utah.edu, is where you can start a chat or submit a tip from a desktop. Okay, so here's that download and sign in page. So like I said, once you download it, you will be asked if you are a primary education student, higher ed, or parent guardian. And then once you K through 12 schools, we have all of them listed there. And we ask students to identify which school that they belong to for contact reasons. So if our clinicians are speaking with a student and they assess that this student is in need of an imminent risk and they need immediate help, like I said, the only thing we know about you is your school, unless they have decided to tell us more. But we have those SafeUT identified contacts at each school. They know they're a contact. They have agreed to be a contact. They help us with the process. So that gives us a starting point of how we can gather more information about the student, maybe get some demographic information to help them basically in that immediate situation. So that is why we ask them to identify which school they attend. So here is that chat feature. So once they start a chat, a text box will pop up, and when we ask them, you know, what's on your mind, I think is the little grayed out words that they start typing over. So this individual said, I'm thinking about hurting myself and I really need to talk to someone. There is that automated message response. So it says, thank you for reaching out through SafeUT. We will be right with you. And like I said, 30 to 45 seconds, one of our clinicians is texting them back. And then they just have a chat, just like a normal texting conversation within the app.
Hey, Ashely, there was a comment in the chat. Can you have multiple schools?
So can an individual be connected to multiple schools?
That's what I think, because a lot of our mentors tend to float between multiple schools.
So if the mentor is the one texting in, they would just say they're a parent, guardian, or educator. But if the student themselves, the youth, are using it, they would have to click which school, the one school that they belong to. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
If they still need clarification, pop it in the chat.
Okay, yep. So if your mentor is, like I said, floating between the schools, if the mentor is the one texting in or submitting that tip, or texting in, I should say, they would just hit that parent guardian button. But if they're submitting a tip, you can choose a different school every time you submit a tip. So here is a chat success story from SafeUT. So a student took a cocktail of medications as a suicide attempt before school one morning. After being reminded of SafeUT at an assembly that morning, ironically, she actually sent in a chat to ask for help. Our clinician and the student texted back and forth, and she provided enough information where our clinician was able to get EMS out to the school, pulled her out of class. Unfortunately, she collapsed in the hallway, and she was in the ICU for 5 days. But she did survive, and it was due part to SafeUT. And she has shared her story with so many others, and she's giving us permission to share her story with you all as well. But it was wonderful, and it happened within the past year. So back to the home screen, we do have start a call. So if you do not want to chat, if you prefer to call someone and speak with them on the phone, go ahead and click that start a call button. Our crisis line number pre-populates for you. You just hit call, they're going to answer the phone. So a student used SafeUT to call the crisis line as he was standing by the road, thinking about immediately ending his life. He just really needed someone to talk to, someone to kind of dump all of his feelings out on. And the SafeUT staff, they were able to contact local police, locate the student. And like I said, they worked together to locate the student, and then they ensured his safety for sure. So back to the home screen, we have submit a tip. So once you hit submit a tip, we will ask you to choose which category your tip falls under. And we do have an extensive list of categories, but for some reason, if you feel like your tip doesn't fit into any of those, we do have an other option. And then once you choose a category, we ask you for as much information as you know about what you're reporting on. So what do you know about it? Who was involved? What date? What time? Where did this happen? Whether it was at someone's house or on Snapchat or at school, and then any others with the knowledge. And then what else our tip feature has is individuals can include attachments as well, which has actually been so beneficial for us and our clinicians and in the schools as well. So for example, if a student or even a parent saw something on social media, so let's say it's Instagram about, it's an Instagram post about guns, like a picture of guns, and then they say, don't come to school tomorrow, something along those lines, they can screenshot that post. They can include that post with their tip. So our clinicians know exactly what they're referencing. And here is another tip success story. So a mother of a student also has given us permission to share this with you all. The student was struggling with mental health challenges, and she reached out to us and said, you know, I thought he and I were in a good place, but without me knowing, he went on Instagram. He posted 3 back-to-back messages stating he was going to kill himself. His friends saw the post and immediately sent tips to SafeUT. Our SafeUT clinicians contacted police, were able to get him immediate help. And the mom said, I'm amazed at the efficiency of SafeUT. From the initial posts to the officer knocking on the door was less than 10 minutes. So our clinicians are really responding quickly. And if a student or an individual submits a tip and our clinicians feel like they would like more information, or they would like to ask questions, or maybe ask this individual, see if they can get some more details out of them, our clinicians can start a chat within the tip. So they can submit a tip, and then, like I said, our clinicians can open that chat, and the tipster and the clinician can start texting back and forth if our clinicians have questions or would like more information. So here's that SafeUT workflow that I was talking about earlier. So you could see here at first, we have an individual who's calling on the phone and we have an individual who's texting on the phone. Either or, they'll get you to the same master's level clinicians for SafeUT. And then once our clinicians answer the phone, answer the text, or answer the tip, they are having conversations with those individuals while also doing a mental health assessment as well, a crisis response assessment. So they're assessing, you know, where is this individual right now? Are they an imminent risk to themselves or others? And then they will proceed as needed. So ideally, our clinicians like to give the autonomy to the individuals, try to really, you know, if they're just in need of navigating their feelings or sharing their feelings with someone and just need some resources, our clinicians will do that. They will provide that crisis response and give them resources, or suggest they reach out to a parent, or suggest they reach out to a counselor at school, or suggest they reach out to a safe, trusted adult. Like I said, our clinicians really try to keep that chat, that text, that call within the individual and the clinician. But at the same time, that being said, our main goal is to keep everyone safe, whether that's the individual or others. So while they're having those conversations and they're doing those assessments, they might need to reach out to others for help. And who those others might be, you know, we might start with the school, because that is where the student is connected. So we have those school contacts, whether that's the principal, assistant principal, counselors, whoever is a SafeUT contact. We could also reach out to law enforcement, as we have done previously, if we feel like they are in an imminent risk and we need to start that life-saving intervention process. Like I said, we will reach out to law enforcement, and our clinicians in our program, we're averaging just over one life-saving intervention a day. So other options is that once we contact the school, we could possibly contact parents, or if it's after school and the student is home, things like that. Or that little group right there is our MCOT team. So our mobile crisis outreach team, which is basically a mental health 911. If a student is just in crisis, and it's not a law enforcement emergency, but maybe it's a mental health emergency, we will get our MCOT on site and help the individual, you know, work through that crisis that they're having. So that's really just a basic overview of SafeUT. Are there any questions?
Not a question so far, but a comment that a mentor actually knows a school where students submitted a tip about a school shooting and they were protected, and the student was detained before entering the school. So like you were talking earlier, that really immediate response played out in this mentor's life.
Yes, absolutely. And those SafeUT contacts that we have at the school, they are aware that it is a possibility that they will get a call after school hours. You know, it could be 5 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. We have actually had to contact individuals, you know, at 2, 3 in the morning if it is an imminent risk for the safety of others in their school and in their community as well. So we couldn't be as successful without the school and their help as well.
And then there is a question I missed. Can you submit a tip anonymously?
So all tips are confidential. So we know nothing about you. When you submit a tip, you choose the event, and it does ask you to choose the school that it goes to, the tip that it's about. So if you are a parent or a guardian and you submit a tip, it will ask which school this tip needs to go to, because what our clinicians do is once they assess it to see if this tip needs immediate attention or not, they actually forward it along to the school. But as in terms of your identity, it is confidential.
Good to know. Okay, guys, you've got plenty of time if you'd like to unmute yourselves and ask any specific questions. Must be time for more coffee. Got quiet on us.
That mid-morning.
That or they're still, marinating on all the information that Holly and you have given them this morning. I really appreciate this. I was actually just chatting with Julia in the chat that I had asked you to present this because I think it's an invaluable tool, sorry. But also because I hope this helps the mentors. I know you guys are privy to a lot of information from students that can be heavy. And I feel like SafeUT tip line is one of those options to never worry alone, as Kathy Davis always tells us.
Yes.
Prevention specialist. For me, this is one of those moments where life has come full circle because I was with the administrators when they started talking about creating such an app. One of the folks from Utah had gone to Colorado and heard about what Colorado was doing, and they came back to Utah. And anyway, it's just amazing that, well, gosh, almost 15 years later, here we are with this awesome, amazing, functional tool that, we can see even from just the comments in the chat and the stories you've shared, the impact it's had on Utah. So anyway, but I'll talk all day. So if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to unmute or pop it in the chat if that works best.
And I will also put my email in the chat as well, in case you are interested in having some SafeUT collateral sent out to you. Like I said, go ahead and just email me. We have business cards in English and in Spanish. We have posters in both English and Spanish, and then we have magnets in English. So just tell me what exactly you're looking for and the quantity. I'm actually in the office tomorrow, so I can get that out to you as early as tomorrow.
And what I would say about I'm gonna call it swag, is it's kind of, you can use it in I know we don't all have offices, so maybe, it's attached to your lanyard, or it's on your bag, or it's a sticker on your computer. Sometimes it can be one of those silent reminders, as well as giving the resource to the students. So I just wanted to add that little thought that, having the SafeUT logo somewhere on your mentor gear might be helpful for the kiddos in addition to giving out the resources. So,
and Amanda, is there a home base by any chance? For example, if we do have stickers, and that type of swag is a good idea as well for the mentors to always have. Is there one place that I could send just a bunch of that stuff to be distributed to all of your mentors and throughout? Not this time.
Me. Me or each district has a YIC director or coordinator. And I know the majority of our mentors' caseloads, so I kind of have an idea of how many kids, each district sees. But primarily it would be the individual district, like YIC director or whatever, that would be the point of contact to send stuff to. And I can share that information with you. In fact, Kathy Davis has offered to let me have some of her coping cubes. So maybe this would be an option to put our head.
Oh, absolutely. She gave me a whole box. So I work very closely with Kathy Davis and Michelle Knight. I have actually gone on a handful of crisis response outreaches with them when a school does experience a suicide. Yes, we work very cohesively. So anything I could do to help you with that, definitely.
Yeah, so let's put our heads together and see what we can do to get resources out to the mentors. I know that our agency, that's the we, sorry, sends out these resources to the district level, but I don't know that it's filtering down to the mentor level. So I'll make work with you and Kathy to get some care packages sent out.
Yes, absolutely. And if it's something I can just come and drop off at your office, possibly I could also make that happen as well. Sometimes that's easier than trying to package it all up.
Well, we'll meet at USB if we do that. So My house is little and full. And there was a couple comments in the chat about using the app on Canvas or a way that is not on a phone. And one of our amazing mentors shared the SafeUT website right in the chat. So as long as you've got a web, a computer, a tablet, something, they can get to it that way.
Yes. And actually, just so you guys have some, let's visit that website.
Okay. And then, while Ashley's looking that up, phones, I know that we're also used to technology. Even I hesitate to dial a phone number and make a phone call. But for the kiddos that don't have a phone, perhaps, stepping into the counselor's office to make that phone call or asking to go to the nurse's room and using the school phone, I think would be reasonable accommodations as well.
Has my screen changed from the PowerPoint to a red screen?
So it's still a PowerPoint.
Okay, let me.
And it might be that if you share specifically the PowerPoint versus the screen.
I think that's what I did. How's that?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so that this web address, like I said, can be used on a desktop. This is what you'll see, and they could simply, start that chat or submit a tip. So those are the two functions that are used most often. So as long, if they can get out of class and maybe head to the library to start a chat on a computer, they have that option as well.
I think that's one of the things I like best about SafeUT is the multiple options. Like it kind of is one of those individualized moments where it fits,
Yeah, and we work with schools routinely, obviously, but just gaining the feedback about accessibility and things as such, we are always open to feedback, and we're open to learning and growing and really adjusting to what the students need and what the teachers and the educators need and what the parents need. So.
Another good comment here. We have one of our mentors is a school counselor also, and she's working with the YIC kids specifically. But in the past years as a counselor in the school, she taught kids about SafeUT and has seen it make a huge difference when she's worked with those students. So she thinks this training is awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. And like I said earlier, SafeUT would not be what it is today without the collaboration and without the extra work from the schools. They do a great job talking about it, promoting it, and really sharing the resources with the students as well. So thank you so much for spending time on that.
Okay, well, not seeing anybody hop off mute. I do have some notes I'll send you on an email, Ashley, about who's interested. And like I said, we'll put our heads together and get some stuff out.
Yes, and I also will get back to you about your Tuesday meetings as well. So.
Okay, all right. So yeah, unless somebody does have another question, I will let us end early. I will do the Ann Jones thing. I will end early, and we'll be happy that we got away with getting out. So thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate this, especially your willingness to be in contact and support the mentors. They work with some kiddos that deal with some rough stuff. So, but like I said earlier, I just want to remind mentors, this is for you as well as your students. I know I've used the SafeUT line. When you need to talk to people, you need to talk to people, and it may not be something you want to talk to your circle about. And that's one of the things I love about SafeUT. So thank you all so much for taking time this morning to spend with us today, and let Ashley know if you have SafeUT questions, or Holly know if you have 504 questions. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Thanks, Ashley.